महाराज श्री गुरुदेव की जय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरशतश्मद श्रील भक्तिवेदांत वामन गोसाई महाराज की जय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरशतश्मद श्रील भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरशतश्मद श्रील भक्ति प्रज्ञान केशव गोसाई महाराज की जय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद शतरशतश्मद श्रील भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद की जय। नित्य प्रविष्ट महाभागवत श्री गोक्षरस बाबूजी महाराज की जय। नित्य प्रविष्ट श्री सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। नित्य प्रविष्ट वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबूजी महाराज की जय। श्री रूप गौर्य गुरु वर्ग की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भट्ट दास रघुनाथ शार गोसाई प्रभु की जय। श्री स्वरूप दामोदर राय रामानंदारी श्री गौर पार्षद वृंद की जय। नाम चय श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल ब्रज मंडल मथुर वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट प्रदात गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंड श्याम कुंड की जय। श्री मोहन देवी गंगा देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योगमाया की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। धन्यवाद प्रणाम इंदिरा माता जी। ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय राधिकाय प्रियात्मने श्रीमद्भक्तिवेदान्त नारायणीति नामिने। नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नाम्ने गौरतिशे नमः। गुरुवे गौरचन्द्राय राधिकाय तदालये कृष्णाय कृष्णभक्ताय तरभक्ताय नमो नमः। यं प्रव्रजन्तम् अनुपेतमपेतकृत्यं द्वैपायनो विरहकातर आजुहाव पुत्रेति तन्मयतया तरवोऽभिनेदुस्तं सर्वभूतहृदयं मुनिमानतोऽस्मि। नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। शृण्वतां स्वाकता कृष्णा पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तन हृदन्तस्थो ह्यभद्राणि विदुनोति सुहृत्सतम्। नष्टप्रयेष्वभद्रेषु नित्यं भगवतसेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। तवैवास्मि न जीवामि त्वया विना इति विज्ञाय राधे त्वां नायमां चरणन्तिकम्। भक्त्या विहीना अपराधलक्षय क्षिप्ताष्टकामदितरङ्गमध्ये कृपामयि त्वं शरणं प्रपन्ना वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दम्। भज श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासरि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। Dandavat pranams, I say Shri Mataji and Prajumna Prabhu. So now we're beginning the... Wait, who else is there? Dandavat pranams. I don't know who this is because it just says Facebook user, but thank you for the kind comments. So I thought maybe we can just read this. It won't take very long. But this is from the book Bhāgavatam, and this is a summary of the 4th canto, what we just read. This is, I'm spaced out. This is a summary of the Rudra Gita, which we just read, and it's very short. The son of the Supreme Vaishnava. Prithu's son was Vijitashva, whose son was Havirdhana. Of the 6 sons of Havirdhana, the eldest was Prācīnabarhiṣat. He married Shatadruti and begot 10 sons named the Prachetas. King Prācīnabarhiṣat ordered the Prachetas to beget children, to purify themselves before entering married life. The Prachetas went to the forest to perform austerities. When they arrived at a serene lake in the forest, they saw the mystic appearance of Lord Shiva. Compassionate Shiva, knowing their intentions, told the Prachetas, "Anyone who is surrendered to Lord Vasudeva is as dear to me as the Lord himself. The devotees, too, consider me as dear to them as the Lord himself." Lord Shiva then taught the Prachetas a song called the Rudra Gita. In the Rudra Gita, Lord Shiva first offers prayers to the Chaturvyuha, the quadruple expansions of Krishna, namely Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Prajumna, and Aniruddha, who maintain the gross and subtle elements of this universe. They are also the presiding deities of our consciousness, our ego, intelligence, and the mind, together called the Antakarana, respectively. Shiva prayed to them to pivot the Antakarana towards bhakti, which is their real purpose. Next, Shiva offered prayers to the deities of material elements and to Lord Krishna, who is the source of all these deities. Lord Shiva next prayed to see the enchanting form of the Supreme Lord Krishna and described that form to the Prachetas in vivid details. Shiva then further described the unparalleled beauty of the Lord and his 4-handed form of Vishnu. Shiva then glorified Bhakti Yoga, the devotees of Krishna, and prayed for the association of pure devotees. He said, "Krishna is obtainable by bhakti alone. Such bhakti is the rarest achievement. One who desires heaven or temporary pleasures cannot worship Krishna while a sincere devotee who worships Krishna cannot be affected by the force of invincible time. Even half a moment's association of such a devotee cannot be compared to heaven or even liberation from material bondage. A devotee's heart which is purified by bhakti is not agitated by material objects. Blessed by Bhakti Devi, such a devotee understands the Lord's name, fame, form, and activities." Shiva further described how Krishna expands as Mahavishnu for the purpose of material creation through his Maya. He also described the time feature of the Lord. Having thus instructed the Prachetas, Lord Shiva departed, and the Prachetas meditated on the instructions of their Guru Shiva. They applied themselves to the method and message of their Guru with great dedication. They chanted the Rudra Gita for 10,000 years under the water. So now we're going to read. Anyways, I'll just read it. And let's just see a summary of the actual verses. Both these books are written by the same person, by the way. One is Bhāgavatam, and Lord Shiva concludes and follows Shruti. So Shiva says to the Prachetas, "My dear Prachetas, perform your prescribed duties and with pure hearts, offering your minds to the Lord, chant this prayer." Note, perform your prescribed duties. This statement indicates that the Prachetas had karma mishra bhakti. Lord Hari is in everyone's heart. Chant his glories, meditate on him, and worship him. And then the method is studying it, contemplating it, being strong in vows, and concentrating your intelligence. You should all chant this prayer repeatedly with great respect. The origin of Rudra Gita. Brahma taught us this prayer, and ordered by him, we created progeny. By chanting this prayer, we destroyed our ignorance. So this is how they all created progeny, by chanting this Rudra Gita. Falshruti. By chanting this prayer, one attains the highest benefit of becoming a devotee of the Lord. Just to praise knowledge, Lord Shiva says, of all auspicious items in this world, knowledge is supremely auspicious. By it, one can cross over the ocean of nescience. Link. However, knowledge gives more difficulties and is not suitable as the boat to cross samsara. Therefore, in this verse, he speaks of bhakti. Vibrating this song with faith, one can please the Lord who is rarely conquered. A steady person attains the best of whatever he desires from singing my song. Hearing these prayers in the early morning and letting other hear them certainly frees one from all bondage of karma. Recite these prayers with concentration, which are as effective as great austerities. In the end, you will achieve your desired result. Alright, so now we're beginning the descriptions of the characteristics of King Purañjana, chapter 25. And also we're beginning the fourth part of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, of the fourth canto, I mean. And we'll read this over this fourth part. It's the biggest part of the 4 parts of the fourth canto, and we'll finish this in 24 days. I wrote the schedule in our group. Maitreya uvacha iti sandeshya bhagavan barhishadar abhipujita Pashyatam Rajaputranam Tatraivantartadehara. The great sage Maitreya continued speaking to Vidura. My dear Vidura, in this way Lord Shiva instructed the sons of King Barhiṣat, also known as Prācīnabarhiṣat. The sons of the king also worshipped Lord Shiva with great devotion and respect. Finally, Lord Shiva became invisible to the princes. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This chapter contains a great lesson concerning the monarchical kingdom in the days of yore. When King Barhiṣat was considering retiring from the royal duties, he sent his sons to perform austerities in order to become perfect kings for the welfare of the citizens. At the same time, King Barhiṣat was being instructed by the great sage Nārada about the material world and the living entity who wants to enjoy it. It is therefore very clear how the kings and princes were trained to take charge of the kingdom. Welfare activities for the benefit of the citizens were aimed at understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The human form of life is especially meant for understanding God, our relationship with Him, and our activities in His service. Because the kings took charge of the spiritual education of the citizens, both the king and the citizens were happy in Krishna consciousness. In this regard, we should remember that the monarchical hierarchy of Prācīnabarhiṣat comes from Maharaj Dhruva, a great devotee of the Lord and the most celebrated disciple of Nārada Muni. Prācīnabarhiṣat was then too much engaged in fruitive activities due to performing different types of yagyas. One can actually be promoted to higher planetary systems or to the heavenly kingdoms by performing various yagyas. But there is no question of liberation or going back home back to Godhead. When the great sage Nārada saw that a descendant of Maharaj Dhruva was being misled by fruitive activities, Nārada took compassion upon him and personally came to instruct him about the ultimate benediction of life, Bhakti Yoga. How Nārada Muni indirectly introduced the Bhakti Yoga system to King Prācīnabarhiṣat is very interestingly described in this 25th chapter. I'm just want to see, are we reading to verse 11, is it? 12, okay. Rudragitam Bhagavata Stotram Sarve Prachetasa Chapantaste Tapaste Pur Varshanam Ayutam Jale. All the Pracheta princes simply stood in the water for 10,000 years and recited the prayers given to them by Lord Shiva. Purport. In the course of the modern age, one may be amazed how the princes could stand in the water for 10,000 years. However, living within air or living within water is the same process. One simply has to learn how to do it. The aquatics live within the water for their whole lifespan. Certain favorable conditions are created to enable them to live within water. In those days, however, people used to live for 100,000 years. Out of so many years, if one could spare 10,000 years for the sake of austerity, he would be assured of success in his future life. This was not very astonishing. Although such a feat is impossible in this age, it was quite possible in Satya Yuga. Prācīnabarhiṣam kṣata karma svasakta manasam Nārada tattvagya kripalu pratyabodayat. While the princes were undergoing severe austerities in the water, their father was performing different types of fruitive activities. At this time, the great Saint Nārada, master and teacher of all spiritual life, became very compassionate upon the king and decided to instruct him about spiritual life. Purport. As pointed out by Prabodhananda Saraswati Thakur, a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya, Kaivalya, or merging into the Brahman effulgence, is just like going to hell. He similarly states that elevation to the upper planetary systems for the enjoyment of heavenly life is just so much phantasmagoria. I kind of know what phantasmagoria means, but I'm just curious what the dictionary definition is. A sequence of real or imaginary images like that seen in a dream. Okay, see, I didn't have such a clear understanding. This means that a devotee does not give any importance to the ultimate goal of the karmis and jnanis. The ultimate goal of the karmis is promotion to the heavenly kingdom, and the ultimate goal of the jnanis is merging into the Brahman effulgence. Of course, the jnanis are superior to the karmis, as confirmed by Lord Chaitanya. Koti karmanishta madhe eka jnani shrishta. One jnani or impersonalist is better than many thousands of fruitive actors. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 19:147. Therefore, a devotee never enters upon the path of karma, or elevation by fruitive activities. Nārada Muni took compassion upon King Prācīnabarhiṣat when he saw the king engaged in fruitive activity. In comparison to mundane workers, those who are trying to be elevated to the higher planetary systems by performing yagyas are undoubtedly superior. In pure devotional service, however, both karma and jnana are considered bewildering features of the illusory energy. Shreyastvam katamar rajan karma natmana ihase dukkahani sukha bhakti shreyastan neha cheshyate. Nārada Muni asked King Prācīnabarhiṣat, "My dear king, what do you desire to achieve by performing these fruitive activities? The chief aim of life is to get rid of all miseries and enjoy happiness. But these two things cannot be realized by fruitive activity." Purport. In this material world, there is a great illusion which covers real intelligence. A man in the mode of passion wants to work very hard to derive some benefit, but he does not know that time will never allow him to enjoy anything permanently. Compared with the work one expends, the gain is not so profitable. Even if it is profitable, it is not without its distresses. If a man is not born rich and he wants to purchase a house, cars, and other material things, he has to work hard day and night for many years in order to possess them. Thus, happiness is not attained without undergoing some distress. Actually, pure happiness cannot be had within this material world. If we wish to enjoy something, we must suffer for something else. On the whole, suffering is the nature of this material world, and whatever enjoyment we are trying to achieve is simply illusion. After all, we have to suffer the miseries of birth, old age, disease, and death. We may discover many fine medicines, but it is not possible to stop the sufferings of disease or death. Actually, medicine is not the counteracting agent for either disease or death. On the whole, there is no happiness in this material world, but an illusion person works very hard for so-called happiness. Indeed, this process of working hard is actually taken for happiness. This is called illusion. Therefore, Nārada Muni asked King Prācīnabarhiṣat what he desired to attain by performing so many costly sacrifices. Even if one attains a heavenly planet, he cannot avoid the distresses of birth, old age, disease, and death. Someone may argue that even devotees have to undergo many distresses in executing austerities and penances connected with devotional service. Of course, for the neophytes, the routine of devotional service may be very painful, but at least they have the hope that they will ultimately be able to avoid all kinds of distresses and achieve the highest perfectional stage of happiness. For the common karmis, there is no such hope, because even if they are promoted to the higher planetary systems, they are not guaranteed freedom from the miseries of birth, old age, disease, and death. Even Lord Brahma, who is situated in the highest planetary system, Brahmaloka, has to die. Lord Brahma's birth and death may be different from an ordinary man's, but within this material world, he cannot avoid the distresses of birth, old age, disease, and death. Wow, so he gets sick also. If one is at all serious about attaining liberation from these miseries, he must take to devotional service. This is confirmed by the Lord himself in Bhagavad Gita 4:9. Janma karma chame devyam evam yo veti tattvata tyakta deham punar janma naiti mameti sorjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Thus, after attaining full Krishna consciousness, the devotee does not return to this material world after death. He goes back home, back to Godhead. That is the perfect stage of happiness, unblemished by any trace of distress. Rajovacha na janami mahabhaga param karma pavedadhi bruhi me vimalam jnanam yena muccheya karmabhi. The king replied, O great soul Nārada, my intelligence is entangled in fruitive activities. Therefore, I do not know the ultimate goal of life. Kindly instruct me in pure knowledge so that I can get out of the entanglement of fruitive activities. Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung, Sat Sangachari koino asate vilasa te karane lagilo je karma bandha phasa. As long as a person is entangled in fruitive activities, he is bound to accept one body after another. This is called karma bandha phasa, entanglement in fruitive activities. The noose of bondage to karma, yeah. It does not matter whether one is engaged in pious or impious activities. for both are causes for further entanglement in material bodies. By pious activities, one can take birth in a rich family and get a good education and a beautiful body, but this does not mean that the distresses of life are ultimately eliminated. In the Western countries, it is not unusual for one to birth in a rich aristocratic family, nor is it unusual for one to have a good education and a very beautiful body. But this does not mean that Westerners are free from the distresses of life. Although at the present moment the younger generation in Western countries has sufficient education, beauty, and wealth, and although there is enough food, clothing, and facilities for sense gratification, they are in distress. Indeed, they are so distressed that they become hippies, and the laws of the laws of nature force them to accept a wretched life. Thus they go about unclean and without shelter or food, and they are forced to sleep in the street. It can be concluded that one cannot be happy simply by performing pious activities. It is not fact that those who are born within a silver spoon in their mouth are free from the material miseries of birth, old age, disease, and death. The conclusion is that one cannot be happy by simply executing pious or impious activities. Such activities simply cause entanglement and transmigration from one body to another. Narottam Das Thakur calls this karma bandha phans. King Prācīnabarhiṣat admitted this fact and frankly asked Narada Muni how he could get out of this karma bandha phans, entanglement and fruitive activities. This is actually the stage of knowledge indicated in the first verse of Vedanta Sutra, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. When one actually reaches the platform of frustration and attempts to discharge karma bandha phans, he inquires about the real value of life, which is called Brahma Jigyasa. In order to inquire about the ultimate goal of life, the Vedas enjoin Tadvigyanartam Sagurum Eva Bigachet Samit Pani Shrotriyam Brahmanishtam. To understand these things properly, one must humbly approach with firewood in hand a spiritual master who is learned in the Vedas and firmly devoted to the absolute truth. Oh, well, this program does, this thing that I'm reading from does a strange thing where it sometimes puts two translations in. In order to understand the transcendental science, one must approach a bona fide spiritual master. King Prācīnabarhiṣat found the best spiritual master, Nārada Muni, and he therefore asked him about the knowledge by which one can get out of the entanglement of karma bandha phans, fruitive activities. This is the actual business of human life. Jivasya tattva jigyasa narto yash cheha karmabi. As stated in the second chapter of the first canto of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, verse 10, a human being's only business is inquiring from a bona fide spiritual master about the extrication from the entanglement of karma bandha phans. Griheshu kutadharmeshu putradhara dhanartadhi na param vindate mudho bhramyam sangsaravartmasu. Those who are interested only in a so-called beautiful life, namely remaining as a householder entangled by sons and a wife and searching after wealth, think that such things are life's ultimate goal. Such people simply wander in different types of bodies throughout this material existence without finding out the ultimate goal of life. Purport. Those who are too much, let me just make sure the connection's good. It is. Okay. Those who are too much attached to family life, which consists of entanglement with wife, children, wealth, and home, are engaged in kutta dharma, pseudo duties. Prahlad Maharaj has likened these pseudo occupational duties to a dark well, andhakupam. Prahlad has purposely spoken of this dark well because if one falls into this well, he will die. He may cry for help, but no one will hear him or come to rescue him. The words Bhramyam Sangsaravartmasu are significant. In Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 9.151, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu very clearly explains, Brahmanda Brahmite kon bhagyavana jeev. All living entities are wandering in different types of bodies throughout different planets, and if, in the course of their wanderings, they come in contact with a devotee by the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, their lives become successful. Even though King Prācīnabarhiṣat was engaged in fruitive activity, the great sage Nārada appeared before him. The king was very fortunate to be able to associate with Nārada, who enlightened him in spiritual knowledge. It is the duty of all saintly persons to follow in the footsteps of Nārada Muni and travel all over the world to every country and village, just to instruct illusioned persons about the goal of life and to save them from the entanglement of karma bandha, fruitive activity. Nāraduvaca Bobo Prajapate Rajan Pashun Pashyat Tvayadvare Samgyapitan Jiva Sangan Nirgrinena Sahasrasha. The great saint Nārada said, O ruler of the citizens, my dear king, please see in the sky those animals which you have sacrificed without compassion and without mercy in the sacrificial arena. Purport. Because animal sacrifice is recommended in the Vedas, there are animal sacrifices in almost all religious rituals. However, one should not be satisfied simply by killing animals according to the directions of the scriptures. One should transcend the ritualistic ceremonies and try to understand the actual truth, the purpose of life. Nārada Muni wanted to instruct the king about the real purpose of life and invoke a spirit of renunciation in his heart. Knowledge and the spirit of renunciation, Gyan Vairagya, are the ultimate goal of life. Without knowledge, one cannot become detached from material enjoyment, and without being detached from material enjoyment, one cannot make spiritual advancement. Karmis are generally engaged in sense gratification, and for this end they are prepared to commit so many sinful activities. Animal sacrifice is but one such sinful activity. Consequently, by his mystic power, Nārada Muni showed King Prācīnabarhiṣat the dead animals which he had sacrificed. Ete tvam sampratikshante smaranto vaishasam tava samparitam ayakutaish chintantu titamanyava. All these animals are awaiting your death so that they can avenge the injuries you have inflicted upon them. After you die, they will angrily pierce your body with iron horns. Purport. Nārada Muni wanted to draw King Prācīnabarhiṣat's attention to the excesses of killing animals and sacrifices. It is said in the Shastras that by killing animals in a sacrifice, one immediately promotes them to human birth. Similarly, by killing their enemies on a battlefield, the Kshatriyas who fight for a right cause are elevated to the heavenly planets after death. In Manu Samhita, it is stated that it is necessary for a king to execute a murder, so that the murderer will not suffer for his criminal actions in his next life. On the basis of such understanding, Nārada Muni warns the king that the animals killed in sacrifices by the king await him at his death in order to avenge themselves. Nārada Muni is not contradicting himself here. Nārada Muni wanted to convince the king that overindulgence in animal sacrifice is risky, because as soon as there is a small discrepancy in the execution of such a sacrifice, the slaughtered animal may not be promoted to a human form of life. Consequently, the person performing sacrifice will be responsible for the death of an animal, just as much as a murderer is responsible for killing another man. When animals are killed in a slaughterhouse, 6 people connected with the killing are responsible for the murder: the person who gives permission for the killing, the person who kills, the person who helps, and the person who purchases the meat, the person who cooks the flesh, and the person who eats it. All these people become entangled in the killing. Nārada Muni wanted to draw the king's attention to this fact. Thus, animal killing is not encouraged, even in a sacrifice. Atrate katayashyemum itihasam puratanam Purañjanasya charitam nibodhagadato mama. In this connection, I wish to narrate an old story connected with the character of a king called Purañjana. Please try to hear me with great attention. Purport. The great sage Nārada Muni turned toward another topic, the history of King Purañjana. This is nothing but the history of King Prācīnabarhiṣat told in a different way. In other words, this is an allegorical presentation. The word Purañjana means one who enjoys in a body. This is clearly explained in the next few chapters. Because a person entangled in material activities wants to hear stories of material activities, Nārada Muni turned to the topics of King Purañjana, who is none other than King Prācīnabarhiṣat. Nārada Muni did not directly deprecate the value of performing sacrifices in which animals are sacrificed. Lord Buddha, however, directly rejected all animal sacrifice. Srila Jayadeva Goswami has stated, Nindasya Gyavideraha Śrūti-jatam. The word Śrūti-jatam indicates that in the Vedas, animal sacrifice is recommended, but Lord Buddha directly denied Vedic authority in order to stop animal sacrifice. Consequently, Lord Buddha is not accepted by the followers of the Vedas. Because he does not accept the authority of the Vedas, Lord Buddha is depicted as an agnostic or atheist. The great sage Nārada cannot decry the authority of the Vedas, but he wanted to indicate to King Prācīnabarhiṣat that the path of karmakanda is very difficult and risky. Foolish persons accept the difficult path of karmakanda for the sake of sense enjoyment, and those who are too much attached to sense enjoyment are called mudas, rascals. It is very difficult for a muda to understand the ultimate goal of life. In the propagation of the Krishna consciousness movement, we actually see that many people are not attracted because they are mudas, engaged in fruitive activity. It is said, Upadesho himurkanam prakopaya nashantaye. If good instructions are given to a foolish rascal, he simply becomes angry and turns against the instructions instead of taking advantage of them. Because Nārada Muni knew this very well, he indirectly instructed the king by giving him the history of his entire life. In order to wear a gold or diamond nose pin or earring, one has to pierce the ear or nose. Such pain endured for the sake of sense gratification is endured on the path of karmakanda, the path of fruitive activity. If one wishes to enjoy something in the future, he has to endure the trouble in the present. If one wants to become a millionaire in the future and enjoy his riches, he has to work very hard at the present moment in order to accumulate money. This is karma kandiya. Those who are too much attached to such a path undergo the risk anyway. Nārada Muni wanted to show King Prācīnabarhiṣat how one undergoes great troubles and miseries in order to engage in fruitive activity. A person who is very much attached to material activity is called Vishayi. A Vishayi is an enjoyer of Vishay, which means eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Nārada Muni is indirectly indicating, through the story of King Purañjana, that eating, sleeping, mating, and defending are troublesome and risky. The words itihasam, history, and puratanam, old, indicate that although a living entity lives within the material body, the history of the living entity within the material body is very old. In this regard, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has sung, Anadi karama phale puri bhavana bhajale tori bare nade ki upay. Due to my past fruitive activities, I have fallen into the water of material existence, and I cannot find any way to get out of it. Every living entity is suffering in this material existence from past activities. Therefore, everyone has a very old history. Foolish material scientists have manufactured their own theories of evolution, which are simply concerned with the material body. But actually, this is not the real evolution. The real evolution is the history of the living entity, who is Purañjana, living within the body. Sri Narada Muni will explain this evolutionary theory in a different way for the understanding of sane persons. Asit Purañjano nama Raja Rajan Brihatshava Tasya Vigyata nama Asit Saka Vigyata Cheshtita. My dear king, once in the past lived a king named Purañjana who was celebrated for his great activities. He had a friend named Avigyata, the unknown one. No one could understand the activities of Avigyata. Purport. Every living entity is Purañjana. The word Puram means within this body, within this form, and Jana means living entity. Thus, everyone is Purañjana. Every living entity is supposed to be the king of his body because the living entity is given full freedom to use his body as he likes. He usually engages his body for sense gratification because one who is in the bodily conception of life feels that the ultimate goal of life is to serve the senses. This is the process of karma kanda. One who has no inner knowledge, who does not know that he is actually the spirit soul living within the body, who is simply enamored by the dictation of the senses, is called a materialist. A materialistic person interested in sense gratification can be called a Purañjana. Because such a materialistic person utilizes his senses according to his whims, he may also be called a king. An irresponsible king takes the royal position to be the personal property. He takes the royal position to be his personal property and misuses his treasury for sense gratification. The word Brihatshava is also significant. The word Shrava means fame. The living entity is famous from ancient times, for as stated in Bhagavad Gita 2.20, Najayate mriyate va. The living entity is never born and never dies. Because he is eternal, his activities are eternal, and although they are performed in different types of bodies, Nahanyate hanyamane sharire. He does not die even after the annihilation of the body. Thus, the living entity transmigrates from one body to another and performs various activities. In each body, the living entity performs so many acts. Sometimes he is a great hero, just like Hiranyakashipu and Kamsa, or, in the modern age, Napoleon or Hitler. The activities of such men are certainly very great. But as soon as they're, great in in having huge, consequences. But as soon as their bodies are finished, everything else is finished. They remain in name only. Therefore, a living entity may be called Brihatshava. He may have a great reputation for various types of activities. Nonetheless, he has a friend whom he does not know. Materialistic persons do not understand that God is present as the Supersoul, who is situated within the heart of every living entity. Although the Paramatma sits beside the Jivatma as a friend, the Jivatma, our living entity, does not know it. Consequently, he is described as Avigyata Sakha, meaning one who has an unknown friend. The word Avigyata Cheshtita is also significant because a living entity works hard under the direction of the Paramatma and is carried away by the laws of nature. Nonetheless, he thinks himself independent of God and independent of the stringent laws of material nature. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita 2.24, Achedoyam adahyoyam akledashosha evacha nitya sarvagatastanur achaloyam sanatana. The individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can be neither burned nor dried. He is everlasting, all-pervading, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. Sorry, I was trying to talk while I was yawning. The living entity is Sanatan, eternal. Because he cannot be killed by any weapon, burnt into ashes by fire, soaked or moistened by water, nor dried up by air, he is considered to be immune to material restrictions. Although he is changing bodies, he is not affected by the material conditions. He is placed under the material conditions and he acts according to the directions of his friend, the Supersoul, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 15.15. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matasmritir jnanam apohanam cha. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Thus the Lord as Paramatma is situated in everyone's heart, and he gives directions to the living entity to act in whatever way the living entity desires. In this life and in his previous lives, the living entity does not know that the Lord is giving him a chance to fulfill all kinds of desires. No one can fulfill any desire without the sanction of the Lord. All the facilities given by the Lord are unknown to the conditioned soul. Sonveshamana sharanam Babrahma Prithivim Prabhu Nanurupam Yada Vindar Abhutsa Vimana Iva. King Purañjana began to search for a suitable place to live, and thus he traveled all over the world. Even after a great deal of traveling, he could not find a place just to his liking. Finally, he became morose and disappointed. Purport. The travelings of Purañjana are similar to the travelings of the modern hippies. Generally, hippies are sons of great fathers and great families. It is not that they are always poor. By some way or another, they abandon the shelter of their rich fathers and travel all over the world. As stated in this verse, the living entity wants to become a Prabhu, or master. The word Prabhu means master, but actually the living entity is not a master. He is the eternal servant of God. When the living entity abandons the shelter of God, Krishna, and tries to become a Prabhu independently, he travels all over the creation. There are 8,400,000 species of life, and millions and millions and millions and trillions of planets within the creation. The living entity wanders throughout the various types of bodies and throughout different planets, and thus he is like King Purañjana, who traveled all over the world looking for a suitable place to live. Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung, Karma Kanda Jnana Kanda Kevala Vishera Bandha. The path of Karma Kanda, fruit of activities, and the path of Jnana Kanda, speculation, are just like strong pots of poison. Amrita Bolia Jeba Kai Nana Yodi Sada Pire. A person who mistakes this poison to be nectar and drinks it travels in different species of life. Kandarya Bhakshana Kore. And, according to his body, he eats all types of abominable things. For instance, when a living entity is in the body of a hog, he eats stool. When a living entity is in the body of a crow, he eats all kinds of refuse, even pus and mucus, and enjoys it. Thus, Narottam Das Thakur points out that the living entity travels in different types of bodies and eats all kinds of abominable things. When he does not become ultimately happy, he becomes morose or takes to the ways of hippies. Thus in this verse it is said, Na anurupam, that the king could never find a place suitable for his purposes. This is because in any form of life and on any planet in the material world, a living entity cannot be happy because everything in the material world is unsuitable for the spirit soul. As stated in this verse, the living entity independently wants to become a Prabhu, but as soon as he gives up this idea and becomes a servant of God, Krishna, his happiness ultimately begins. Therefore, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sings, Miche mayar vashe jacho beshe kacho habu dubu bai. Radha Krishna bol bolo re sabai. My dear living entity, why are you being carried away by the waves of Maya? As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 1861. And kacho habudubu means, you're like going under, above the water, drowning, like eating habudubu. Ishvara Sarvabhutanam, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 1861, Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hridesharjuna Tishtati Brahmayan Sarvabhutani Yantra Rudhani Mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. The living entity is carried in the machine of the body through so many species of life on so many planets. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur asked the living entity, why is he being carried away in these bodily machines to be placed in so many different circumstances? He advises that one surmounts the waves of Maya by surrendering unto Krishna. Jiva Krishna das se vishwas korlito arduka nai, Radha Krishna bol bol bolore sabai. As soon as we confront Krishna, Krishna advises, Sarva dharma prityaja mamekam sharanam vraja, aham kang sarva papebhyo mokshaishami masujaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear. Bhagavad Gita 1866. Thus we are immediately relieved from traveling from one body to another and from one planet to another. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Brahmanda Brahmite Kon Bhagyavana Jeev. Chaitanya Madhya Lila 19:151. If, while traveling, a living entity becomes fortunate enough to become blessed by the association of devotees and come to Krishna consciousness, his real life actually begins. This Krishna consciousness movement is giving all wandering living entities a chance to take to the shelter of Krishna and thus become happy. In this verse, the words Vimana Eva are very significant. In this material world, even the great King of Heaven is also full of anxiety. If even Lord Brahma is full of anxiety, what of these ordinary living entities who are working within this planet? Bhagavad Gita 8:16 confirms, Abrahma bhuvanaloka puna avirtanarjuna. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. In the material world, the living entity is never satisfied, even in the position of Brahma or in the position of Indra or Chandra. One is full of anxiety. Even in the position of Brahma or in the position of Indra or Chandra, one is full of anxiety simply because he has accepted this material world as a place of happiness. We're ending with this verse here. Nasadu mene ta sarva bhutale yavati pura kaman kamayamanuso tasya tasyo papattaye. King Purañjana had unlimited desires for sense enjoyment. Consequently, he traveled all over the world to find a place where all his desires could be fulfilled. Unfortunately, he found a feeling of insufficiency everywhere. Purport. Srila Vidyapati, a great Vaishnava poet, has sung. Oh, that's a famous kirtan. Tatala saikate vari bindu sama sutamita ramani samaje. Material sense gratification with society, friendship, and love is herein compared to a drop of water falling on the desert. A desert requires oceans of water to satisfy it. And if only a drop of water is supplied, what is the use? Similarly, the living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who, as stated in the Vedanta Sutra, is Anandamayo Bhyasat, full of enjoyment. Being part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity is also seeking complete enjoyment. However, complete enjoyment cannot be achieved separate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In his wanderings in the different species of life, the living entity may taste some type of enjoyment in one body or another, but full enjoyment of the senses cannot be obtained in any material body. Thus, Purañjana, the living entity, wanders in different types of bodies, but everywhere meets frustration. But everywhere he meets frustration in his attempts to enjoy. In other words, the spiritual spark covered by matter cannot fully enjoy the senses in any circumstance in material life. A deer may become absorbed in the musical sounds vibrated by the hunter, but the result is that it loses its life. Similarly, A fish is very expert in gratifying its tongue, but when it eats the bait offered by the fisherman, it loses its life. Even the elephant, who is so strong, is captured and loses its independence while satisfying its genitals with a female elephant. In each and every species of life, the living entity gets a body to satisfy various senses, but he cannot enjoy all his senses at one time. In the human form of life, he gets an opportunity to enjoy all his senses. In the human form of life, he gets an opportunity to enjoy all his senses pervertedly. But the result is that he becomes so harassed in his attempted sense gratification that he ultimately becomes morose. As he tries to satisfy his senses more and more, he becomes more and more entangled. Tomorrow we will read Nārada's description of the city of 9 gates, the body. And Purañjana sees a beautiful woman, Purañjani, and description of the woman, and we'll read a little bit of how Purañjana tries to flatter the woman. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Jai Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari, Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju ki Jai, Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju ki Jai, Nitilapa Vishnu Vishnupal, Ashtara Shatashmad Shala Bhakti Vedanta, Narayan Gosai Maharaj Shala Gurudev ki Jai, Nitilapa Vishnu Vishnupal, Ashtara Shatashmad Shala Bhakti Vedanta, Vaman Gosai Maharaj ki Jai, Nitilapa Vishnu Vishnupal, Ashtara Shatashmad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Nitilapa Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtara Shatashmad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Trivikram Goswami Maharaj ki Jai. Nitilapa Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtara Shatashmad Srila Bhakti Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada ki Jai. Nitilapa Mahabhagavat Srila Bhakti Srila Babaji Maharaj ki Jai. Nitilapa Vishnu Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki Jai. Nitilapa Vishnu Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki Jai. Shri Rupa Nogoriya Guru Varga ki Jai. Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Patadash Raghunath Shar Gosai Prabhu ki Jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaur Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki Jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj ki Jai. Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund ki Jai. Shri Muna Devi Ganga Devi ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai. Shri Bhakti Devi ki Jai. Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya ki Jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavacha Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Sattvatai Namo Namaha. Pancha Kalpatarubhyashta Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat Pranams. Dandavat Pranams Mantramurti Didi Haribo. Mantramurti Mataji, and Haribol. Dandavat pranams Indira Mataji and everybody else here. Dandavat pranams.